got some problems that you wanna solve? Then let's chat. That job getting on your nerves? Then let's chat. Girl, you know I can relate, so let's chat. Cause I'ma tell you what the bottom line is.
I'ma tell you what the bottom line is. I'ma tell you what the bottom line is. I'ma tell you what the bottom.
It's your girl Cece. I'm your hostess with the mostest.
I'ma tell you what the bottom line is.
Hey, you guys, welcome to another episode of The Bottom Line Is. It's your girl Cece, the hostess with the mostest, and I have my friend here today, Hadiyah, and today we are going to talk a little bit about trauma. So in season 1, we kind of, scratched the surface and talking about the types of traumas that people can go through and, yes, how you can somewhat evolve, but now we want to really get into it because, you really don't realize, and I know for me, I just started therapy, and the first question that he asked me was, have you experienced any traumas? And I was like, in my childhood. And I said, no, not to my knowledge. I think I had a pretty good average childhood, not to say I'm better than anybody else, but I really think I had a good childhood. But after that therapy session, that question kind of haunted me a little bit until the next session. And I started to really think, like, I know I didn't have it. It wasn't perfect. Of course, everything stands room for improvement, right? Yeah. But I was like, So then I started thinking about rejection. And how that kind of manifested into my adult life. So along those lines is what we're going to be talking a little bit about, just how those childhood traumas that for whatever reason, from a psychological standpoint, we kind of swept it under the rug.
Yeah, we kind of suppressed it and kind of put it in the back. And I don't think that we realize how it resurfaces.
Exactly.
So your initial response to when your therapist asks you, did you have any childhood traumas? Most people are going to be like, no.
Right. Because it's like also that trust too of wanting to like share and I think be open too, because I feel like since that was the first session, it's like I'm also looking to find out who you are before I kind of share all my, personal baggage.
But I also think I think most of the time when people go to therapy, they're not going to therapy to talk about their childhood traumas. They're going to therapy to talk about what's currently affecting them in their adult life.
That's true.
Then as you dive deeper into those conversations and you start pulling the layers back, then you realize like what I'm experiencing now is because of what happened to me when I was a child and because I didn't get therapy then. So then you realize like I've been going through life all this time thinking I don't have any traumas.
Right.
And now they're resurfacing in my adult life.
Right. And, also another episode I had in season 1, it's like that negative stigma of therapy, but it's really a good thing to go through.
Yeah.
Of course we all vent to our friends, right? But
sometimes it's not enough.
Yeah, it's not enough. I mean, they're gonna have your back and go along sometimes with whatever you say.
I mean, you definitely don't want a bunch of friends just agreeing with whatever you say. But yeah, I mean, I think when I thought about going to therapy, I knew I needed to go. I just felt like I needed to go.
Right.
And there was a lot of things happening in my life that time that was just like, you need to go talk to somebody else. And although I was talking to my friends and my friends were being supportive at the time, it just wasn't enough.
Right.
You know what I mean? It was just like, this is a little deeper, but also I'm that type of person where it's like, I don't want to burden other people with my problems. And although, these people are my friends, who's to say they don't have their own traumas and things that are affecting them, and they're kind of like putting that aside to let me unpack or unload on them. So I feel like for me, going to therapy, yes, it's professional help, but it's just another way for you to dive deeper into those conversations. And not to say I wasn't having deep conversations with my friends, but it's like they only can understand to their level of understanding.
Right.
And this is not their profession.
Right.
They're just listening to me because they care and because I'm their friend.
Right.
You know what I mean? And they want to be there for me, which is great. But I just felt like it's something deeper happening here. Right. And I'm not going to be able to get to the bottom of that by just talking to my friends.
No, for sure. And like you said, we have to have at some point where we unpack that, unpack so we can move forward, because there is a lot of suppression, that goes on from being in different stages of our lives. Right. So, we're just going to unpack that today and just kind of talk about how it can, be triggered in certain situations in our adult life and go from there. So if you haven't done so already, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us about your own traumas and how you're dealing with them. So Hadiyah, talk to us, if you don't mind sharing about some things that, you've gone through.
So when I initially started my journey with going to therapy, it wasn't related or geared toward having childhood trauma. At the time, I was, my my mom who raised me, she was suffering from dementia.
Okay.
And so I wasn't in a place where I was accepting it. I was just kind of like ignoring it. And I was just putting my energy elsewhere. So like I was in school at the time, in the middle of a pandemic, just had a baby. So I just was busying myself. And I wasn't really trying to accept what my mom was going through.
Right.
And so doing that, I really was just suppressing my feelings. And I wasn't really talking about it. I was just like, oh, it's cool. And I just kept busy. Like everything else I was keeping up with.
Right.
And so just over time, I just started realizing like I was sleeping late. I wasn't showering. I wasn't brushing my teeth. I did have a baby, so I had to get up.
Right.
But I just was getting up because I had to get up and because I had to take care of my child at that time. But I was just noticing that and just how I was like kind of isolating myself in a little way, but just not being honest either.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I just felt like I was just trying to keep up this thing like, oh, I'm strong and I got this, when really I didn't have it.
Yeah.
And so, and then at the time I was in the midst of like a misunderstanding, a partial, like almost falling out with a friend of mine that I had been friends with for like over 25 years.
Oh, wow.
So this is
tough.
My best friend at the time. And so it just was so many things happening at one time. And I wasn't just allowing myself to process that. So when I went to therapy, it was really just to kind of talk about how I was feeling about what I was witnessing my mom experience. And I think, you know, when you think about your parents getting old and things like that, you never think about, I don't know, maybe other people do, but I never thought ever that my mom would die. You know, like,
no, that's what
you know what I mean? Like, and I'm not saying that I don't think people are going to die. Yeah, you know, but it's like, as you're going through life, you just, that's not something I thought about.
Right.
So I never was prepared for that in a sense, but I also wasn't prepared for what my mom was experiencing.
Right.
And although, you know, my grandmother suffered from dementia as well, and then her mom, it just never dawned on me that, you know, my mom in her 70s or early 70s would experience that.
Right.
And then how it just drastically happened so fast.
Yes.
And so, and again, you know, it was in the middle of a pandemic. The pandemic had just started. I had just had my third child. And, you know, kind of watching my mom's health decline just was not something I expected. So it was like I was trying to deal with that, but not deal with it. But then I also just had a baby.
Right.
And I'm also in school full time.
Right.
And I also have 2 other kids.
Yeah.
And I'm also
needs your attention.
And I'm also married.
Right.
I also have a house. You know what I mean? So it's just like it was a lot. And so when I initially went to therapy, it was, you know, talking about the situation with my mom, and we talked about that a lot. And it was very helpful. But as I went on, we started diving deeper into other things.
Okay.
And so that's when we started kind of talking about like, well, what was your childhood like? And all those things. And so as that came to surface, it took me a while to kind of connect, you know, my childhood trauma to how I'm showing up in the world as an adult.
Right.
Because at first I didn't see the connection.
Right.
You know, sometimes we look at it very separate. It's like, oh, this is my childhood and now this is my adulthood. But it's like, it's a journey from that to there.
For sure.
And so the more I went to therapy, the more I unpacked those things. And now you realize like, and I'm not saying that I didn't feel like my childhood was traumatic. I mean, my story is very different. It's very unique in its own way. But I think, you know, I just thought like, well, that was then and this is now.
Right.
But again, as you start talking to your therapist, it's like you start connecting the dots.
For sure. Yeah.
And so, you know, I definitely dealt with abandonment issues when I was a child. The fact that I wasn't raised by my biological parents, I was raised by my birth mother's cousin, which is my mom who raised me. I didn't grow up with my siblings, but I have a lot of siblings.
Right.
So it just was a lot of different things that we talked about that just kind of put in perspective, like how I'm showing up as an adult.
Right.
Why I'm, you know, friends with certain people, or why, you know, I've taken on certain tasks, or just a lot of different things. And so, you know, you start connecting the dots. And so it just started to make sense. And I think the most important thing is realizing that, yes, you did experience trauma, but now I'm an adult. So I have a right or a duty to myself to decide, am I going to let that continue to affect me in my adult life, or am I going to do something about it?
Right.
And so that was one of the things that was most important to me. So yeah, I definitely had abandonment issues. I think as a child, I had to go through a lot of dark and uncertain times alone.
Right.
you know, I was just one of those children just kind of, I had to internalize a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And as a child, you don't realize that once you become an adult, how you always feel like you're alone and you have to internalize what you're experiencing and your emotions. That shows up different,
right,
as an adult.
No, for sure.
You know, so it can show up as people pleasing. It can show up as you always feeling like you got to put on for people to notice you, or for you to get attention, or people to validate you.
Right. And those are real things that people don't realize that they're actually experiencing. But I wanted to pause and say, you know, the fact that, you know, all of those things that you just shared, first of all, thank you for being vulnerable. Okay. And thank you for sharing your story and being able to come out of that to actually share that. You know, that takes a lot of courage to be able to share that. And, you know, you mentioned all of those things happening during the pandemic. You know, the pandemic itself was a whole thing, right?
Yes.
Let's be clear. But I totally get it with the whole transition, you know, with the parent and everything. You had a lot of balls in the air that you had to juggle, you know, and still maintain your sanity. So the fact that you took that initial step to go to therapy, because like you said, some people don't even realize until they hit rock bottom that they actually have a problem and they have to get help for it. And sometimes it's too late because you don't realize you kind of act out in certain ways. You know, I know over the years, I've realized and come to the determination of, you know, functional depression.
Oh, I was definitely depressed and functioning.
Yeah, because it's like you
and high functioning.
Yeah,
at that.
Same. And it's like because your body is running on adrenaline and being on autopilot. You know,
so on autopilot.
Yeah, you're like, okay, this is my third child. Like I already know what to do. We just gonna roll with it, and everything else is just like, okay, I'm gonna deal with it as it comes, but I'm not gonna go out my way. You know, anything like that. So it's a lot, and you know, it takes a lot to be able to kind of really do the work, you know. And I just had one of my friends recently tell me that I'm proud of you for doing the work, you know. And, you know, when you're going through that, all those life-changing activities, it's very hard to kind of see the end of the tunnel. You know?
It was hard. It was, you know, you want to be in a space where you're happy because you just had a baby. You know, babies are blessings, but it's like I had a baby in the middle of the pandemic. My mom was also in the early stages of her dementia in the pandemic. So trying to explain a pandemic to her was difficult. She wasn't getting it. You know what I mean? We're like, don't be going to the stores. And, you know, she thought it was a hoax and she didn't believe that it was what it was. And so it just was really difficult trying to navigate through that.
I can imagine.
You know what I mean? And then when I had my third child, I wasn't expecting to be home with my other two children. I was expecting them to go to school. So now I'm home with my oldest son at the time was starting middle school. My daughter at the time was just starting pre-K, kindergarten. Oh, wow. And I have a newborn. I'm also in the middle of my semester.
I know. And that virtual learning, I know for children was not for the weak. All my friends that are
so it's like, I was expecting to be home with one child. Now I'm at home with two. They're sitting at the dining room table trying to virtually learn next to each other. I got a baby on my boob. Like,
I know.
My mom thinks that COVID is a hoax. It's not real. My husband is going to work. I'm at home. You know what I mean? So now I'm at home with 3 kids, trying to do school, trying to, you know, keep my mom at home. I still got to cook. I still got to clean. I still got to do homework.
Yeah, you still got to show up.
Yeah, I still have to show up. So I just felt like I definitely was like super depressed, but still functioning, because I didn't have a choice.
Yeah, and it's like when you're a highly functional depressed person, people around you, they don't realize that something is wrong.
You don't even realize something is wrong.
Until, again, well, for me at least, I know until I just hit rock bottom, and I had to hit it like 3 times. The third time hit me like, oh, you got to do something about this, honey. Like,
I didn't really, it took me a while to get to like the bottom. But it's almost like I was trying to catch myself because I felt it coming. So I was like, let me just go to therapy. And I thought, you know, going to therapy would prevent me from getting into that dark bottom space, but it didn't. I eventually was like in a really dark place. And it was difficult because I was always the strong friend. I was always the friend that looked like I had everything together. And I, you know, oh, you look like you got 3 kids, you balancing it out, you still look nice. You know, you married, you this and this. And I'm just like, how long am I going to keep this shit up? How long am I going to keep this facade up? But I think it kind of goes back to my childhood trauma, because if I let this shit fall, then y'all gonna see the real me. And am I prepared for that? Because now I gotta be vulnerable. I gotta be transparent. I gotta ask for help. You know
and
what
then
I mean?
all the questions that people ask you
so
as a
people
result,
just like, so you all of a sudden just hit rock bottom, but you've been doing this, or it looks like you've been managing it. So what's wrong now?
Right.
You know what I mean? And so I think for me, I was just in that space, like, I got to keep it together.
Yeah.
I got to keep it together. And even my husband didn't really know that I was depressed because he wasn't home.
Right.
So by the time I would get up with the baby, he was already leaving out. So he didn't see me not brushing my teeth. He didn't see me not showering. He didn't see me going maybe 4, 5, 6 hours without eating. And when he came home, I'm there with the kids. I'm trying to do homework. I'm cooking dinner. I'm about to fold clothes. You know, I'm talking to a friend. So it didn't seem like...
It was like the normal.
Right. You know what I mean? Until I was just like, yeah, no, that's not working out.
And so now, being as though you were married, did you, before you started seeking out therapy, did you have that conversation?
Yeah, I had that initial conversation with my husband, but at the time I don't think he understood the severity of the situation. And for me, it was difficult to explain what I was feeling as I was feeling it.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, so there was a bit of a disconnect there because it's like, I know something is wrong and I'm glad you're in therapy, but it seems like it's more that's happening.
Right, right.
And so my therapist was just like, you know, you have to be able to communicate to your partner what it is that you need. You know, when you're having these moments of deep depression or deep sadness, you got to be able to communicate that. And for me, I just wasn't in a space where I felt like I was ready to communicate that. But I just wanted him to just know.
Right.
I just wanted him to just figure it out and step in.
Right.
And so that was something I talked to my therapist about. She was just like, he's never going to do that.
Right. And I think that's a lot of like what we expect too.
Yeah.
I don't know, I can't say if it's just women that expect it, but just our people that we're around, we expect them to like know us well enough to know what's
like, if you see me drowning, I feel like that you should just throw me the thing so you can get me up out of here.
Right. And I feel like that probably sometimes breaks relationships up because they're like, people are like, well, dang, you don't care for me or whatever.
Yeah. And it wasn't that I didn't think he cared. Right. I just didn't feel like I needed to say it.
Right. No, I get you. I'm just saying in general, I think a lot of people probably go through that if they don't already have a very tight unit. And
it wasn't that we didn't have a tight unit. I think sometimes when you're going through something, you just feel alone in that.
Right.
You know what I mean? You just like, I'm in this alone. Nobody is experiencing what I'm experiencing at this time. And so you just kind of take it on as your own solo project, but it's not a solo project.
Right.
You know what I mean? You need that support. And so I was just kind of like closed off. But I think, you know, he was still going to work in the pandemic. You know, he had his own things and concerns. And so I had to advocate for what I was experiencing and explain it to him and then tell him what I need from him in those moments where I'm, you know, severely depressed and not in a good mental space. And that was difficult for me. And it almost felt like a thing of weakness in a way.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I was just, and not that I've always been a pretty transparent and vulnerable person. But I think for me at that time, I was kind of like closed off.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like, I have to come to my husband and say, I'm depressed, but it's nothing that you can do to fix it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's difficult, you know, as being his wife, because men like projects. They want to be able to fix whatever is going on with you. And so my fear was, he's not going to be able to fix this. So then what does that look like for us?
Right. It's a couple different things you kind of had to process.
Yeah. And so my therapist was like, you can't think about it like that. She was like, think about the fact that he is your partner and you're kind of leaving him in the dark about what you're experiencing, and you're experiencing these things alone and you don't have to.
Right.
And I was just like, I never thought about that.
Right.
From his perspective,
yeah,
like what that looks like to him.
Right.
And so I think he definitely wanted to have a better understanding of what I was experiencing and how he could support me. But his thing was, you got to tell me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Tell me what you need, type of thing.
I ended up doing that. So whenever I felt like, you know, today is not the day, I can't cook, I can't deal with the kids, I'm just in this bed, depressed, I had to be able to communicate that.
Yeah.
And that was difficult because I like doing those things.
Yeah.
You know, I like being there for my kids. I like cooking dinner. And so it just was, I just felt like I was failing in a lot of areas in my life.
Right.
And
I think that's a natural feeling too. And I think a lot of people, you know, experience that, but they really, like you said, they don't know how to deal with it. And it's good to be able to, you know, talk about that. So when you had that discussion with him, you know, and he said basically, you know, let me know how I can help you, so to speak. How did that, as time went on, how did that work with the communication and the relationship with you both?
I think it helped me to further heal what I was going through.
Okay.
Because now I'm like, it's out there. You know, he knows what I need. So all I have to do is communicate that. So it kind of made things a little lighter, but I just still felt like the therapy journey was still mine alone that I had to, endure. But it was nice to have his support.
Right.
And for him to kind of have a better understanding of what I was really experiencing.
No, for sure.
And whenever I was feeling like that, I would just communicate to him. Whether it was a phone call, whether it was a text. And he'd be like, cool. And he would tell the kids, like, if you need something, don't bother mommy. She needs some time. He kind of kept them downstairs with him so I could have that moment to kind of just be and work through those emotions. So it definitely was helpful.
No, that's definitely, awesome. And I'm glad that he, was there for you. I was watching a show yesterday, and while this couple had been together for maybe 5+ years, and the spouse had supported his girlfriend, longtime girlfriend, through her health journey, and then he started getting insecure. It's like sometimes people get into their own head, and then that started to affect the relationship, and then like she was an emotional eater or whatever. So it's like when they broke up, then she went right back to her old vice, if you will. Yeah. And I think, like you said, it's very helpful to have that supportive person that is going to understand that it's not like, well, okay, I'm not here to fix it, but you just tell me what you need, and I'm here to comply. If you need me to do this, do that, I'm here. And that is a rarity, and that's an amazing thing that you found.
Yeah.
Also,
me and my husband have been together, 15 years? That's married awesome. It'll be 8 in June. So we've always been pretty open.
Right.
Even when we were dating, we were pretty open about what our life would look like together. So that's never been an issue. I think, just being in such a dark place, and you don't want that to kind of, it was almost like I didn't want it to affect him, but it was going to affect him because I'm married to him. So he's going to have some feelings about it. But I think it was more so of me trying to protect him and not kind of essentially pass on my burdens to him.
No, I get it.
You know what I mean? Because it's like, I'm not in a good space, but I want you to be in a good space because we still got these kids.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, on that note too, I think it's important for people to understand too, like when you're just starting out relationships, or you are, thinking about taking that next step of marriage. I mean, I know that's why a lot of ministers, before they perform the ceremony, they're like, go through therapy, because you need to be able to have that transparency or open lines of communication, because when you do have a need, you don't want to feel like you can't talk to your partner, because if you can't talk to your partner, then what are we doing? You know what I mean? In a sense. And not saying, that means it's not the right person. I'm not saying that by no means, but what I'm saying is it's just again learning those different ways to communicate your needs, and it, sometimes expectations, that you need from your partner. And I'm definitely not a relationship expert, as I said.
Me either. I'm not either.
Look, let me put that out there.
I'm in year 8, and we still trying to figure it out. Okay, it's not perfect, but it's definitely something that you have to work at. And I like to communicate, but I think sometimes it's not always about what you're communicating; it's how you're communicating. Yeah. And so many things can be misinterpreted, if you're not communicating in a way that's conducive for that other person to comprehend what you're saying. Right. So you can communicate all day, but if he don't understand what you're saying, or that person doesn't understand, then it's like, what are we really talking about? Right. And so I didn't really know how to explain to my husband that I'm suffering from depression. Right. You know what I mean? So I just started sending him articles for him to read about what depression is and what it looks like. You know what I mean? And you can read that at your own leisure, and then we can talk about it later. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because trying to explain to someone what you're experiencing in the same time that you're experiencing is difficult. Yeah, it's hard. Because sometimes I don't know what I'm feeling. Right. I'm just sad.
And then sometimes people ask you follow-up questions, and you're like, I don't know.
Yeah, no.
And then it can frustrate you more.
Yeah. And so I just found myself a lot of times frustrated, because I'm like, it's not clicking.
Right. No, I get you.
So, I just resorted to sending him articles, kind of and even then, I don't think he understood, but I don't think he understood the severity of it. Yeah, no, for because it's kind of almost like levels to depression. One day you're not as depressed, but then you have those days when you in a deep dark hole.
Yeah, it's like an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah, and then you're like, because I remember one time I was in a really dark place that day, and we were messaging each other, and I was trying. I don't know. The communication was just very off and misconstrued. And so he wasn't getting what I was saying. He wasn't taking like what I was saying to him seriously. And so as I'm trying to explain that, he was just further, I won't even say pissing me off, but it was just further pushing me deeper into this dark place. And I think I mentioned something like, well, I don't have to be here.
Oh, wow.
But it still didn't kind of register to him.
Right.
So he ended up calling me, but I didn't answer. And that's when he called one of our neighbors to come over to check on me. Right. But it's like, those moments is like, people don't really get it until you get it. And so I think that was around the time that the guy Twitch, who was on the Ellen show.
I was just sitting here thinking about him.
He had, committed suicide, unalived himself.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
And people were going in on his wife.
Yeah.
About like, well, why didn't you know? And
they still are.
And so for me, I was experiencing that in real life, but I was still here.
Right.
But it really resonated with me because I'm like, if you want to unalive yourself or you are that depressed, it's going to take more than your spouse. It's going to take more than God. It's going to take more than your therapist to keep you from doing that.
Yeah.
When you are that depressed, and you want to end it all, it's nothing that no one can do.
Yeah.
And so I remember I ended up making a post on my Facebook page, and I'm just like, you can't blame somebody's spouse for them wanting to unalive themselves.
Right.
That's something that you think about doing multiple times until you do it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And I'm just like, people benefit from depressed people all the time.
That's true.
You know what I mean? People were benefiting from me. I was still being a light in other people's lives while my light was dimming.
You were drowning. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like, you can't, it's unfair.
Right.
So I'm like, yes, I have a husband. Yes, my husband is supportive. Yes, my husband loves me. But that may not be enough for me on some days. And there's nothing he could do about it.
I get you.
You know what I mean? So it just really bothered me that people were like going at her. And I'm just like, how would she know that? He was obviously severely depressed, but he was functioning.
Right. And
he was keeping up with his same routines and everything.
Yeah, and wasn't transparent, you know.
So how would she know? And it was like, oh, well, wasn't it her gun that he used? But I'm like, when you're that depressed, but you're still functioning, so people think that you're okay, you can do that. That can happen at any point.
Yeah, but I think that's the part too of social media because, on social media, like sometimes, they'll have the collages where it's like Instagram, reality. And people are just so used to what they see on social media and think, oh, well, that person has a perfect life. But we all go through things. So when you actually see a person being vulnerable and, sharing that part of their life, don't judge them for doing that because that takes courage for them to even do that, just like what we're doing today. And, it's like then you want to make them go back in their cocoon because now you're saying all these
but it was like, for me, I felt like, one, it was too soon. That woman just lost her husband.
Yeah. No,
and y'all pointing the finger. It's not a blame game at this point in time.
For them to be detectives to try to figure it out.
Like, no way. And I'm like, when I wrote that post, that's I was in that space. I was just like, I could just end all this shit for real. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But I'm like, people be missing the point and the principle of things. It's like, yes, I'm in this dark space, but it's people who are still benefiting.
Yeah, that's true.
From this in some kind of way. I'm like, people don't check in like that. Yeah. People are not asking questions and not concerned until it's too late. And then at that point, it's already done.
Yeah. And then people are saying the woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Right. And that was the point of my post. I'm like, y'all dragging this woman, but she just lost her whole husband and there was nothing she could do about it. He was adamant about unaliving himself because he wanted to end the pain of whatever he was experiencing. Yeah. And she was not enough, nor was his kids enough for him to say, I'm going to change my mind. He was drowning, obviously.
And, also, too, with him, I believe his family was also, doing some blame on her. And it's like, well, if you all didn't know, I didn't know as his wife or,
And that's what I'm saying. I'm like, I was severely depressed.
Right.
But I was still functioning.
Right.
I was still making breakfast for my kids. I was still getting my kids up to get on virtual learning. I'm breastfeeding. I'm pumping milk. I'm doing school online. I'm still cooking. And cleaning. I'm still, showing up for my husband.
Right.
So it's like, how?
I know. It's a sad thing. It's just, we as a people, like I said, social media don't make it worse. But
I think social media hasn't made it worse. I think we're in this space of everybody feels like they got to be validated by the shit that they post instead of just owning the fact that I don't need to check in to tell people that I'm doing what I'm already doing. You know what I mean? If you live your life, live your life.
Right. But I think that goes along with what you were saying earlier with some of the the other traumas that kind of came out being a people pleaser. I feel like the majority of the world, I could say that for myself. That
I definitely was one.
And that's something that I'm trying to, work through. And then you also talked about abandonment. So how else have some of those childhood traumas that you, discovered through therapy shown up in your adult life?
I mean, I think definitely the abandonment thing. And that was kind of geared around like my sisters. They were living in Baltimore at the time, but they were living with our great grandmother, and I was living with my mom who raised me. So when they left to move to Georgia, I just felt alone. You know what I mean? And it's like I didn't have access to them in the way that I had before. And so for me, I ended up kind of trying to heal that wound and creating relationships with my friends. To fill that void of feeling like I was abandoned.
Right.
And I'm not saying that was a bad thing, but sometimes you may not choose the right friend, in those situations, or what you're looking for in a friend.
Right.
And so, I'm not saying that I made mistakes in choosing friends, but sometimes you may just befriend someone sooner.
Yeah.
Because you
really
see
what you want to see sometimes.
Right.
So I know I'm guilty of that too.
Yeah.
I see the good in the person, but then I miss all the red flags. I miss this. I miss that.
And so I felt like, I started just befriending people so quickly to kind of fill those voids.
Gotcha.
And just having these, I mean, I guess you could almost consider it like trauma bonding, really. Okay. You know what I mean? You just start bonding with people so quickly, and then you start learning, the differences or learning more about the person. And definitely people pleasing. Just feeling like I had to put on or I had to do all these things just to be noticed or just for someone to love me.
Right.
Not realizing that who I'm showing up as should be enough.
Right.
That was one of the things.
And I will say too, on that note, just also remembering to live for yourself, because with people pleasing, we do what we think people want us to do, and we kind of lose ourselves, so then sometimes you do have to have that like meditation time and whatnot to really rediscover who you are, so. And people don't do that. That was on an episode of Harlem, and one of the characters, she just kept dating people, and it's like the relationship just wasn't working out, and then she had to take that moment and say, I need to date myself. I need to find out who I am, what I want, so I can give that to other people, because if you're not in that emotional space, then how can you give for someone
and then you're
else?
just gonna keep attracting the same people in different bodies. Yeah. And
we do that in friendships too, because like you said, we may attract the behavior that we don't want to attract, but it's soothing us at that time, but we don't realize that till we take that mirror and reflect it back. So.
Yeah. And I think also with therapy, it kind of explained to me why I took friendships so serious, because my friendships were essentially kind of replacing the lack of relationships that I had with my sisters. You know what I mean? So,
I do that too.
I was friending people and then staying in these long-term friendships. And not to say that the friendships that I have now weren't worthy of that, but I felt like some of them were not.
Right.
It was just like, I missed that closeness. I wanted that sister bond. So I'm befriending these people, not really giving them an opportunity to show me who they really are, to show me that they're worthy enough to be my friend. I just want the connection. I just want the friendship. And so I'm just befriending all of these people. And so kind of unpacking that and just kind of recognizing the pattern in that. And then anytime I would have any type of disagreement with a friend, I took it really hard.
Yeah.
And my first thing was like not really validating my feelings in that moment, but more so like validating like why they feel like this, or why am I not good enough, to be your friend, or
it's really starting to dissect it.
Yeah. And not thinking like maybe it's not even about me.
Right.
Maybe it's just about this person. And so anytime I ended a friendship, I was like devastated. And I'm like, oh, it had to be something I did wrong. Now, I'm not saying I'm not perfect, because definitely have been some situations where I could have done things differently. But it was just like not always checking in with me first to validate my own feelings. You know what I mean? And to sit with myself and say, well, how do you feel about this first? It was more so of me trying to like just mend the fence because I was too scared to let it go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I did that. And anytime I would end a friendship with someone, I would be devastated.
Right.
And it took me a long time to kind of recover. And then I'm constantly questioning the friends that I still have. Like, am I a good friend? You know, how can I be a better friend? Or, you know, what can I do differently? And they're just like, what the hell are you talking about?
No, I'm guilty of that with relationships. And I do the same thing. And so, like, a lot of what you're saying is, you know, hitting home for me. And I'm sure it's hitting home for a lot of people that are watching this. It's because you don't really realize those things until somebody says it to you. You know, like I thought about like a lot of the things that you said, but then now hearing you out, you know, say it out loud, it's like, oh, light bulb.
Yeah.
You know, it's going on. But yeah, unfortunately, you know, that's what we do. And it's just like, why am I beating myself up over this? Because if I'm not going to change that, you know, I'm spending my energy and my time on the wrong things instead of, well, maybe it wasn't the right thing. And so I'm saying that and I'm speaking out loud. So my friends say no.
And I think, you know, a lot of what I experienced as a childhood was that however I felt about something didn't matter.
Right.
You know, it wasn't important how I felt. So I was always suppressing my own emotions because I didn't want to disappoint my mom, because I didn't want my mom to be upset, or I don't want to be asked these questions. I don't want to have to go through this. So I just never took the time to sit and process my own feelings.
Yeah.
I was so busy worrying about protecting other people's feelings that my feelings took a back seat.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And anytime I got into a romantic relationship, it's like, oh, I got to do this and do that. Because if I don't do this, then he's not going to see me this way.
Right.
So I already came in love bombing.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And, you know, something you just said too, I think too, as children, we try to do a lot of, even though we're the child, we try to do a lot of protection of the adults around us. And I think we all have some, you know, type of, you know, we're guilty of that. And, you know, I don't know why we do that, you know.
But that's something that's taught.
Yeah.
Because as a mom, we're supposed to validate our kids so that they won't be seeking it somewhere else.
True.
So when you're not validated as a kid in your adult life, you're going to seek that attention somewhere else. Because nobody told you that you were enough. It's okay that you're this way. It's okay if you're different. You know, you're unique. All those things. It's our parents' job to validate us. So we don't go seek validation somewhere else. So, you know, for me as a mom, I wanted to do things different with my kid because I knew what it felt like for my mom to not really know who I was as a person. And even as I got older, I just felt like my mom had no idea who I really was. Right. But I also was struggling with, who really am I?
Right.
Outside of doing all these other things to please other people.
Right.
Who am I?
Right.
What do I like? You know what I mean? So with my kids, I was just like, I don't want them to ever feel like they're not enough or they got to put on for me to show up for them or for me to love them. You know what I mean? So I validate my kids all the time, but I also study my kids.
Right.
You know what I mean? I know what they like. I know what they don't like. I know what their interests are. And I encourage them to do the things that they want to do, not do something that makes me look like a good parent.
Right.
Do what you want to do. What's going to make you happy.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'm not going to be here forever.
Right.
And you got to live your life on your own terms. And so I think for me as a kid, I just wasn't validated enough.
And I wanted to kind of like make that towards the to kind of close out the topic. You know, with you have 3 kids and we talked about some of your childhood trauma. So you just kind of started talking about some things that you're changing from, you know, when you grew up to like now how you're raising your children. So just kind of talk about that, because I think that's good for parents to know like what they need to do, because sometimes we can transfer some of those things and not realize it.
No, I'm not perfect. I feel like, you know, parents, and there's no book, there's no right way. You know, every day I feel like I'm learning. All of my kids are at different stages of their life. So I have a 15-year-old. My 15-year-old is a boy. My daughter is 9. And then I have a 4-year-old son. So they're all at different stages of their lives. They all require something different.
Right.
But, you know, how I felt as a child is like I had to internalize and process a lot of things on my own. I don't want that for my kids. So, you know, my biggest thing with them is communicating. I didn't really like getting beat when I was a child. So I don't really beat my kids, you know, like that. It has to be extremely warranted.
Right.
And even still, I would rather have a conversation with them about like, well, what made you decide to do that?
Right.
You know, and what were you thinking about, you know, at that time? So I communicate with my kids a lot.
Okay.
Anytime they come to me with something, it's a teachable moment.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean? It's something that we can learn. And I also feel like with therapy, it really helped me to kind of put things in better perspective about how to approach things with my kids, how to, you know, advocate for myself as a mom. Right. Because, you know, a lot of times as a mom and as a wife, we just keep on taking on. And our needs and what's important to us is always on the back burner. But reality is, if we're not happy, then our kids are not happy.
Right.
And we're doing things from a place of us being overwhelmed, us being touched out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We're tired. It's so much emotional work and labor that you're doing when you're a mom and when you're a wife.
Right.
And so if we're not advocating for ourselves, that comes out as us being irritated or overstimulated or overwhelmed. And that's not a good way to interact with your kids.
Right.
You know what I mean? So therapy really put things in perspective about like me and how important I am. And so, you know, and setting boundaries, because I didn't really have no damn boundaries. I was like, a boundary? What is that?
You mean boundaries with your kids or just boundaries?
Boundaries in general.
Okay. Gotcha.
You know what I mean? I just was so like, whenever somebody needed something,
yeah,
oh, I'll do it.
Right.
And then when it came time to do it, I'm like, I got all this other shit I got to do.
Right.
But I already made the obligation. So
Right.
now I have to do it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I struggle with that a lot. And just feeling like I had to do that because if I don't do that, this person is going to feel this way. Not even putting my own feelings in consideration. And so with therapy, which is really healing for me, and I kind of just passed some of those things to my kids.
Gotcha. You
know what I mean? Like, you know, anytime my daughter would say she had something going on in school with a friend, I'm like, well, what happened? How did it make you feel? And I'm like, well, if this is really your friend, then why would they make you feel that way?
Right.
This is a conversation that you need to be having. I said, now you're more than welcome to give this friend another chance, but you need to let them know how they made you feel.
Right.
And then you need to set a boundary and say, if you do this again, we can't be friends. You know what I'm saying? And so anytime I have an opportunity to have those conversations with my kids, I will. It's very important for me to know my kids. And so I've made it my business to ask them questions, you know, ask them, what are your interests? What do you want to do? Okay, well, what's the plan?
Right.
You know, what do you need me to do to help support you in what you want to do? My mom didn't do that. It was everything I did as a kid was about how it looked to other people for my mom. You know, oh, I want you to be an African dance. Well, I don't want to do African dance.
Right.
But you're going to do African dance because I need people to know that you're cultured. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I did it for 5 years. Wow. But that's not what I wanted to do.
A lot of parents, do that.
And then when I talked to my mom about the things that I was interested in, she was just like, okay, so you figure that out. Figure out how you're going to do that.
Right.
I don't want that for my kids. I don't force my daughter to do anything that she doesn't want to do. I validate her as much as I can.
Right.
My mom wasn't as affectionate with me either. I'm a very affectionate, touchy-feely person with my kids. And I felt like I almost, this probably sounds crazy, but I felt like I almost overloved my kids because I just didn't feel that as a kid.
Right.
So anytime, my kids are extremely spoiled, and it's hard trying to unspoil kids that you spoil. But at that time in my life, I just felt like I just got to do whatever so my kids don't feel what I felt. So whenever they wanted something, I got it. Whatever they needed. My kids always look nice. I always dress them nice. I just had this mindset of if I do this, then they won't feel what I felt. And it really wasn't healthy, which over time I realized, but I just didn't want them to feel what I felt.
Right.
And
that's breaking generational habits too.
Yeah. And that was another thing. I didn't want my kids to just be like, who are you? Or not know who my kids were. So I'm making my business to study my kids.
Right.
And I approach them in a way that is conducive for them. You know, I got to meet them where they are.
Right.
You know, they are not my projects. They're just little humans.
Right.
And they got their own journey that they got to travel. And I just want to be supportive. You know, I want to be there. I want to keep the means of communication open. I didn't really communicate with my mom about a lot of things. And when I did, it was difficult for me to do so. And it was always tied to some type of emotion because it was like, I got to be the one to kind of be the driver in this relationship. And that's a lot of work. You know what I mean? But it also made me like that in all my other relationships. I was always the driver in a lot of my friendships. I'm always the one calling. I'm always the one trying to get people together. I'm always the one coming up with ideas for us to bond and hang out and do those things.
My whole soul right now.
And for a while, I just was like, this is what I have to do.
Right.
You know, and granted, I feel like sometimes people are created solely to change the trajectory of other people's lives.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And the more I dive deep into therapy, my therapist is like, why are you upset about the person that you are?
Okay.
This is your assignment, basically.
Right.
And I had to sit with that because I'm like, but I don't want to be the strong friend.
Right.
I don't want to do this. And she was like, but you're doing it because it's who you are.
Right.
She said the problem is you're doing it for the wrong people.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And so I was like, huh?
Right.
Like, wait a minute.
Right.
And she was like, because you keep saying, she was like, in any family, there's always going to be that one person that comes along that says, no, we're not taking this to the next generation. She was like, you're that person in your family. And she was like, you need to accept it instead of trying to fight it. But she was like, you also have to decide who's worthy of what you're providing them with.
Right.
She was like, everybody's not worthy of that. And I was just like, huh? Like that messed me up. Because I was like, girl.
Right.
She was like, but you are the strong friend.
Right.
You know, you are who you say you are. You do the things that you say you're going to do. You are showing up for these people. You are loving these people. She said, the problem is you're not getting back what you're putting out because you're giving it to the wrong people.
Right.
I said, God.
And I know that makes me feel a certain way too when I, like you said, I put all that out there and then I feel like I'm not getting it back or, you know, like, well, dang, y'all know me, just like you said earlier. It's like, well, why y'all can't figure it out, you know, without me saying it and things like that. But yeah, I know that was like a
yeah. So it really just forced me to set boundaries.
Right.
Set boundaries within my relationship. Set boundaries with my kids. Set boundaries in my connections with people. It just really expanded my whole perspective about life, and I started looking at life completely different.
Right.
I just started having like all of these epiphanies every time I would have a therapy session. I'm like, yo, that's crazy. Like it just really opened my whole mind up in a way that I didn't anticipate. It was so many things that I was learning and unpacking and unlearning and relearning. And I was just like, yo, this crazy.
Right.
But it was so necessary.
Right.
It was so necessary. And I think had I not done that, one, maybe I wouldn't be here. But maybe I wouldn't be more of who I'm meant to be.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so in reference to my kids, I just want them to live their life as authentically possible.
Right.
You know what I mean? I don't want to force them to do things that doesn't sit well with them.
Right. No, for sure.
You know what I mean? And I want them to know that they're enough. You know, I tell my oldest son that all the time. I'm like, you shouldn't have to buy your friendships. You know what I mean? If you showing up as you is not enough, then they ain't your people.
Right.
Same thing for my daughter. I think my 4-year-old, we had a conversation a few weeks ago, and he said, Mommy, I want you to buy me cool clothes like some boy in his class.
Right.
And he was like, I want to wear cool clothes like him. And I said, well, who's to say that you're not already cool?
Right.
Now he's 4.
Right.
But super, super smart. And so I said, Kai, I said, clothes don't make you cool. I said, you're cool because that's just who you are by nature.
Right.
It's not the clothes. You know, I'm like, you're cool because you're kind. You're cool because you're fun. You're cool because you like to learn or whatever. You're cool because you consider your other classmates. The clothes are just an extension of that.
Yeah, just material things.
And I said, it's enough coolness around for you to be cool in your space and your light, and for your classmate to be cool in his space and in his light. You don't need clothes to be cool. He's 4.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so that was a teachable moment because I could have just been like, what? Why you want to dress like that boy in your class?
Right.
And I'm like,
and that would have been the name.
Right. And I'm like, but you're already cool.
Yeah, right.
And, you know, he kind of was like looking down. I was like, no, look at me. You're cool. You're enough. Mommy and daddy and your brother and sister think that you're super cool. Right. And that's enough.
I know that's right.
And you keep showing up in school, in the world as you. That's cool.
No, that's awesome.
You know what I mean? So me, any opportunity I get to validate my kids anytime they bring something to me is a teachable moment. Okay, let's unpack this.
Right. And that's, you know, having those conversations. People sometimes are afraid to have those type of conversations. But, you know, just to, you know, wrap up, what would you, you know, say to the, you know, our followers out there, just in regards to the sum it up, in regards to traumas and unpacking those in a healthy way as you kind of go into adulthood?
I would just say, you know, start thinking about your childhood, any point in your childhood where you just didn't feel like you were enough, or, you know, something happened and you kind of just didn't take the time to process that. It's something there, and it's probably showing up in your relationships and your connections with other people as an adult in any aspect, not even just, friendship and relationships. It could be business. We're interacting with all types of people every day. And don't take anything personal. Nothing is personal. It's purposeful, but it ain't personal. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of people walking around here suppressing things and projecting their insecurities and their traumas on other people. We are not what happened to us, but we can make a decision to be better and to heal from whatever we experience. Therapy ain't for everybody. People deal with things in different ways. But if you feel like therapy is for you, definitely get you a therapist and unpack some things and work through some things. And do it for you. Because at the end of the day, it's not going to matter what it looks like to other people. It's about what it looks and feels like to you. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's my piece.
So you heard it first. So, with that, I'll say the bottom line is put yourself first and really, take the time to really understand you and how you can grow to being a better you. Definitely. And that's really what it's about. I mean, this life is a journey. Nothing was made to be easy when we came here, and it won't be easy when we leave. So you have to put in the work. So make that investment in yourself. Make sure again that you like, comment, and subscribe. And Hadiyah, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
This was a really dope conversation.
No, for sure. And if people want to know more about your journey, how should they reach you?
I'm on Instagram as free to bloom. There's a underscore in between the two and bloom. I also have a style page on Instagram. It's me.fashion.ably. And then I also have a business page on Instagram. It's Bella Blue Lip Pop. It's a chapstick business that my daughter and myself co-own and have.
That's awesome. Yeah. And you will see all those handles listed below. And just make sure that you her page.